You want to know what it feels like to discover that the people you love most see you as nothing more than a convenient ATM machine? Let me tell you about the day I found my own daughter and son-in-law going through my financial documents while I was supposedly napping upstairs. I had been living with them for 3 years by then, ever since my husband passed away, and the loneliness became too much to bear. My daughter had insisted I sell my little house and move in with their family. At the time, it felt like a blessing. I could help with the grandchildren, contribute to household expenses, and never feel alone again. What I didn't realize was that I was trading my independence for what would become the most soul-crushing experience of my life. The transition started innocently enough. My daughter suggested I keep my finances simple by having my pension and Social Security checks deposited into a joint account with her name on it. For emergencies, she said. To make things easier, she explained. I trusted her completely. After all, she was my only child, and I had raised her to be responsible and caring. The first few months felt harmonious. I helped with cooking, cleaned the house while they worked, and spent precious time with my grandchildren after school. But something began to shift as the seasons changed. The conversations at dinner became less inclusive. When I offered my opinions about household decisions or shared stories from my past, I noticed my daughter and son-in-law exchanging glances. Not the warm, amused glances of family members enjoying an elderly relative's tales, but the kind of looks that said they were tolerating an inconvenience. My contributions to conversations were met with polite smiles that never reached their eyes, followed by swift changes of subject. The first real warning sign came when I suggested using some of my savings to take the whole family on a vacation. I had been dreaming of creating beautiful memories with my grandchildren. Perhaps a trip to the mountains where we could rent a cabin and spend uninterrupted time together. My daughter's response was sharp and immediate. That money needed to stay put for my future care, she said. I might need expensive medical treatments, or have to move to a facility someday. The way she said facility made it sound like a threat rather than a practical consideration. Gradually, I noticed other changes. When I wanted to buy small gifts for my grandchildren or purchase my own toiletries and medications, my daughter insisted on handling all transactions. She said it was easier this way, that she was protecting me from confusion and potential scams. At first, I felt grateful for her attentiveness. But as weeks turned into months, I realized I hadn't touched my own money or made a single independent financial decision since moving in. The isolation grew deeper when my longtime friends tried to make plans with me. My daughter always found reasons why I couldn't go. I was tired, she would tell them. I had a doctor's appointment. The weather was too unpredictable for an elderly person to be out. One by one, my friends stopped calling. I began to feel like a prisoner in a house where I was supposedly welcome and loved. My daily routine became rigidly controlled by others. I was expected to be available for childcare whenever needed. But when I wanted to rest or pursue my own interests, there always seemed to be another task requiring my attention. The household ran on my pension money, my Social Security checks, and the monthly distributions from my late husband's retirement account. But I had no say in how any of it was spent. When I asked to see bank statements or understand where my money was going, my daughter would sigh heavily and explain that I shouldn't worry about such complicated matters. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. I had been feeling unwell and went upstairs to rest. After lying down for about an hour, I realized I had left my reading glasses in the kitchen and quietly made my way back downstairs. As I approached the living room, I heard my daughter and son-in-law talking in hushed but intense voices. I paused at the doorway, hidden from their view, and felt my blood turn to ice as I absorbed their conversation. They were discussing my finances in detail, but not with the care and concern I might have expected. Instead, they were calculating how much money I contributed monthly and comparing it to what they estimated my care would cost them. My son-in-law was arguing that they should start putting more of my money into investments under their names, for tax purposes, he claimed. My daughter was worried about what would happen if I ever wanted to move out or regain control of my accounts. They talked about me as if I were a business expense that needed to be managed and optimized. But the words that shattered my heart completely came when my son-in-law said he was tired of having to pretend to enjoy my company. He called me needy and said my constant presence was affecting their marriage and their relationship with their children. My daughter didn't defend me. Instead, she agreed and added that she sometimes felt trapped by the responsibility of caring for someone who contributed money but had become emotionally draining. I stood frozen in that doorway, listening to my own child discuss me as if I were a burden they were stuck with rather than a mother who had sacrificed everything to give her a good life. The betrayal cut deeper than my husband's death, deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. These were the people I had trusted with my life, my security, and my dignity, and they saw me as nothing more than a source of income, coupled with an inconvenient obligation. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every interaction, every decision, every moment of the past 3 years. I began to see patterns I had previously interpreted as love and care for what they truly were: manipulation and control. The joint bank account wasn't for my convenience, it was for theirs. The restrictions on my social life weren't protective, they were isolating. The dismissal of my opinions and feelings wasn't because I was confused or irrelevant, it was because they had never seen me as a person with valid thoughts and desires. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of the woman I used to be. The woman who had raised a child as a single mother after my first husband left. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to put my daughter through college. The woman who had nursed my second husband through his final illness with grace and strength. That woman had not disappeared. She had simply been buried under layers of manipulation and emotional abuse. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my old bank, the one where I had maintained accounts for over 30 years, and explained my situation to a manager I had known for decades. Within hours, I learned the shocking extent of how my finances had been mismanaged. Money that should have been earning interest was sitting in low-yield accounts. Withdrawals were being made regularly for expenses that had nothing to do with my care or well-being. My daughter had been using my Social Security and pension to pay for family vacations, private school tuition for my grandchildren, and luxury items for their home. But more importantly, I discovered that legally, the money was still mine. Despite the joint account, I had every right to remove my daughter's access and regain control of my finances. The bank manager, a kind woman who remembered me from the days when I came in regularly to make deposits from my part-time job, helped me understand my options. I could transfer my money back to individual accounts. I could change the direct deposit instructions for my pension and Social Security. I could take back control of my financial life. The process took several days of phone calls, paperwork, and legal consultations. I was careful to handle everything while my daughter and son-in-law were at work, using the phone in my room and speaking in hushed tones. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking action, rather than simply existing, at the mercy of others' decisions. Meanwhile, I began reaching out to old friends. I discovered that many of them had never stopped caring about me. They had simply been told repeatedly that I was unavailable or not feeling well. When I explained that I was reconsidering my living situation, several offered support and assistance. One friend, who had moved to a senior living community the year before, invited me to visit and see what independent living could look like. The community was nothing like the nightmare facility my daughter had always threatened me with. It was a vibrant place where residents maintained their own apartments, participated in activities they enjoyed, and lived with dignity and autonomy. I could have my own space, my own schedule, and my own social life. while still having access to medical care and support services if needed. Most importantly, I could control my own finances and make my own decisions about how to spend my money and my time. After a week of quiet preparation, I knew I had to confront the situation directly. I waited until my grandchildren were at school and chose a moment when my daughter and son-in-law were both home. I asked them to sit down in the living room because I had something important to discuss. I began by calmly explaining that I had overheard their conversation the previous week. I watched their faces change from confusion to embarrassment to defensive anger as I recounted the details of what I had heard. When my daughter started to interrupt with explanations and justifications, I held up my hand and continued speaking. I told them that I understood they saw me as a financial burden and an emotional drain. I explained that I had taken steps to remove that burden from their lives. I had found a place to live where I could be independent and happy, and I had already begun the process of regaining control of my finances. I would be moving out within the month. The reaction was swift and intense. My daughter immediately switched to tears and apologies, insisting that I had misunderstood their conversation. They loved having me there, she claimed. I was an essential part of their family. My son-in-law, caught off guard by my calm assertiveness, tried a different approach. He questioned my mental capacity to make such significant decisions and suggested I was being manipulated by outside influences. But their words no longer had the power to make me doubt myself. I had spent too many nights lying awake, analyzing every interaction and recognizing the patterns of emotional manipulation. I knew what I had heard, and I knew what I had experienced. More importantly, I knew what I deserved. Over the following weeks, as I prepared for my move, their tactics escalated. One day they would be loving and apologetic, promising changes and begging me to stay. The next day they would be angry and accusatory, claiming I was being selfish and abandoning my responsibilities to the family. They brought my grandchildren into the manipulation, having them ask why I didn't want to live with them anymore, and telling them I was choosing strangers over family. The hardest part of the entire process was explaining to my grandchildren that I wasn't leaving because I didn't love them, but because I needed to take care of myself. I promised them that I would still be their grandmother, still be available for visits and special occasions, but that I needed to live in a place where I felt respected and valued. I tried to do this without poisoning their relationship with their parents, though I wondered if someday they might understand the full truth of what had happened. The day I moved out was both liberating and heartbreaking. As I packed my belongings, I found myself sorting through not just my possessions, but my memories. I kept photographs and mementos that brought me joy, but I left behind gifts and items that now carried painful associations. I was surprised by how little I actually wanted to take with me. The life I was leaving felt heavy and constricting, and I found myself craving simplicity and freedom. My new apartment in the senior community was small but bright. It had large windows that looked out onto a garden, a compact kitchen where I could cook my own meals, according to my own preferences, and most importantly, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first few weeks, I would wake up in the morning and feel momentarily disoriented by the silence. No one was calling my name, asking me to watch children or help with chores. No one was making decisions about my day or my money. The quiet was initially unsettling, but gradually it became precious. The first month was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite the dysfunction of my previous living situation, it had provided structure and social interaction. Even if that interaction was often negative, now I had to rebuild my daily routine, reconnect with old friendships, and learn to trust my own judgment again, after years of having it questioned and undermined. I joined a book club at the community center and discovered that my opinions about literature were not only welcome but valued. I started taking a gentle yoga class designed for seniors and began to feel stronger physically. Most importantly, I began to see a counselor who specialized in helping older adults who had experienced emotional abuse within their families. Through therapy, I began to understand how gradually and systematically my sense of self had been eroded. I learned about the tactics of financial and emotional abuse, and I recognized patterns that went back much further than my 3 years living with my daughter. I began to see how my desire to be helpful and needed had been exploited, and how my natural tendency to put family first had been twisted into a form of self-sacrifice that benefited others at my expense. The counseling process was painful but necessary. I had to confront the reality that my daughter might never acknowledge the harm she had caused or take responsibility for her actions. I had to accept that our relationship might never return to the loving, supportive dynamic I had always imagined we shared. But I also learned that I could grieve the loss of the relationship I thought I had while still maintaining hope for a different kind of connection in the future. 6 months after my move, my daughter called me. It was the first time we had spoken since a series of angry voicemails she had left in the weeks following my departure. Her tone was different now, less demanding and more uncertain. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, to talk. I agreed, but I prepared carefully for the meeting. I had learned to set boundaries and stick to them. I chose a neutral location and set a time limit for our conversation. I reminded myself that I was not responsible for managing her emotions or making her feel better about the situation. My only responsibility was to be honest about my experience and clear about my expectations going forward. The conversation was difficult but necessary. My daughter did apologize, though her apology was mixed with justifications and attempts to minimize the impact of her actions. She explained the financial pressures they had been under and how overwhelmed she had felt by the responsibility of caring for me. She insisted that she had never meant to hurt me and that she had truly believed she was doing what was best for everyone. I listened to her explanations, but I didn't accept them as excuses. I told her that regardless of her intentions, the impact of her actions had been devastating. I explained how the financial control and emotional manipulation had affected my mental health and my sense of self-worth. I made it clear that while I was willing to work toward rebuilding our relationship, it would have to be on different terms. The terms I set were non-negotiable. I would maintain complete control over my finances. Our interactions would be respectful, with no dismissive comments about my age or capabilities. I would not be used as free childcare or expected to contribute to their household expenses. If my daughter wanted a relationship with me, it would be because she valued me as a person, not because she needed something from me. Her response was mixed. Part of her seemed to understand and accept my boundaries, but I could also see her struggling with the loss of control and financial benefit that my previous living situation had provided. She agreed to my terms, but I knew that rebuilding trust would be a long and uncertain process. Meanwhile, my life in the senior community continued to flourish. I made new friends who were dealing with similar challenges of aging, family relationships, and maintaining independence. I discovered that many of my peers had stories of their own about adult children who had tried to control their finances or manipulate their living situations. Sharing these experiences helped me feel less alone and less ashamed of what I had endured. I also found new purposes for my time and energy. I began volunteering with a local organization that helps seniors understand their financial rights and recognize signs of elder abuse. My own experience, painful as it had been, gave me credibility and empathy when working with others who were facing similar situations. I discovered that helping other people navigate these challenges was both healing for me and meaningful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. 1 year after my move, I received an unexpected phone call from my son-in-law. He asked if he could visit me alone without my daughter because he had something he needed to say. I was hesitant, given our history, but I agreed to meet him in the community's common area where other residents would be present. His visit surprised me. He looked uncomfortable and genuinely remorseful as he apologized for his role in the financial manipulation and emotional abuse I had experienced. He admitted that he had viewed me primarily as a source of income and had encouraged my daughter to maintain control over my money. He acknowledged that his comments about finding my presence burdensome had been cruel and unfair. More than the apology, though, I was struck by his explanation of why he was reaching out. He said that watching how our family had fractured after my departure had made him realize how valuable our relationship had been, not in financial terms, but in the stability and wisdom I had brought to their household. He missed having me around, but more than that, he was ashamed of how they had treated someone who had given so much to their family. I appreciated his honesty, but I also made it clear that an apology, while meaningful, didn't automatically repair the damage that had been done. Trust would have to be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not just words. I told him that I was open to working toward a better relationship, but that it would require ongoing respect for my boundaries and autonomy. The conversation marked a turning point in my family relationships. My daughter began making more effort to connect with me on my terms, rather than trying to manipulate me back into the old dynamic. She started asking about my life in the community and seemed genuinely interested in my new activities and friendships. She also began involving me in decisions about my grandchildren's lives in ways that felt collaborative rather than obligatory. The progress wasn't linear or perfect. There were still moments when old patterns would resurface, when my daughter would make assumptions about my availability or capabilities that overstepped my boundaries. But now I had the tools and confidence to address these issues directly rather than silently enduring them. 2 years after leaving my daughter's house, I can honestly say that I am happier and more fulfilled than I have been in decades. I have my own space, my own schedule, and my own money. I have rekindled old friendships and formed new ones. I have found meaningful ways to spend my time that don't revolve around taking care of other people's needs at the expense of my own. Most importantly, I have rediscovered who I am when I'm not defined by my relationships with others. I am not just a mother, grandmother, or widow. I am a complete person with my own interests, opinions, and desires. I have value that doesn't depend on my usefulness to others or my willingness to sacrifice my own well-being for their benefit. The relationship with my daughter and her family continues to evolve. We see each other regularly now, but our interactions feel more genuine and less forced. My grandchildren have adjusted to the new arrangement and seem to enjoy our visits more now that they're not shadowed by the tension and resentment that had previously characterized our household. I know that some people might judge my decision to leave my daughter's home as selfish or unnatural. There's still a strong cultural expectation that aging parents should be grateful for any care their adult children provide, regardless of how that care is delivered. But I've learned that accepting mistreatment in the name of family loyalty isn't noble, it's harmful to everyone involved. The experience taught me that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and autonomy, even when it means making difficult choices that others might not understand. It showed me that financial independence isn't just about money. It's about having the freedom to make decisions about your own life. Most importantly, it demonstrated that true love and respect in family relationships must be mutual, not a one-way obligation from parent to child. I still have challenges, of course. Aging brings its own difficulties. And there are days when I feel lonely or uncertain about the future. But these natural struggles of growing older feel manageable now that I'm facing them from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. I know that whatever happens next, I will face it on my own terms, with my dignity intact and my sense of self restored. Looking back, I understand that the woman who allowed herself to be financially and emotionally controlled wasn't weak or foolish. She was someone who had been taught that love meant self-sacrifice, that being needed was the same as being valued, and that family loyalty required accepting unacceptable treatment. It took tremendous courage for her to recognize that those beliefs were not only wrong, but destructive. The woman I am now knows that real love enhances both people in a relationship. That being valued means being respected as an individual. And that true family loyalty includes standing up for yourself when you're being mistreated. These lessons came at a high cost, but they have given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I have the strength to protect myself, and the wisdom to recognize when that protection is necessary. As I sit in my bright apartment, looking out at the garden where I now grow my own small collection of flowers, I feel a peace that goes deeper than contentment. I feel proud of the choices I made and grateful for the life I've built. I am no longer someone things happen to. I am someone who makes things happen. And that transformation, difficult as it was to achieve, has been worth every challenge along the way.